I wanted to talk to you more about the relevance of 12-step recovery and how it interacts with the criteria of being placed in treatment, which is also known as the ASAM criteria. The ASAM criteria is the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and they have several different criteria that they go through. And tonight, what I'm going to do is go through that, but also we're going to discuss, or I'm going to discuss the relevance of the 12 steps. So to begin with, the ASAM defines addiction as a primary chronic disease of the brain. The way that I look at that is, imagine that you have a cracked mirror, or that you are looking down at the water, and somebody is underneath the water. You think that they're closer than they actually are. You just see things differently than other people see them. It's a cracked perception. The characteristics impact the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual portions of a person in its entirety. It manifests itself, and that's the other simplistic way to look at a disease: is, does it spread, and does it spread to not only the individual but to other people involved? And of course, the answer is yes. Many of you perhaps are recovering addicts. Many of you perhaps are struggling with your own addiction, and certainly all of you come from a family that you know that the disease of addiction impacts the family. So sometimes more than the individual itself. And that's something that I may loop back into about the disease of addiction and how we can arrest the process and prevent ongoing relapses. It's not just a social or criminal justice problem. It's a medical and public health problem, and now more than ever. Unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, mental health is finally getting the public support that it so desperately needed. Of course, it came at a great expense, a great consequence, which mostly came from all the school shootings, which seem to be a norm. It seems to be less right now, but it seems to be a norm. But as a result of that, public opinion has really assisted in the view of addiction and, of course, mental health. So we know that it's a massive public health problem. Let's face it, it's an epidemic of epic proportions, more so than even COVID-19 that we are suffering from right now. The medical diagnosis and treatment are appropriate responses to addiction. ASAM, American Society of Addiction Medicine, points out that without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death, which we all know to be true. It's a serious, potentially fatal illness, but it's treatable. Recovery is possible and happens for millions of individuals with this disease every year. So just to sort of paint the picture for you, that ASAM, these group of doctors, the smartest guys in the world, or ladies, get together, and they're saying that listen, medication intervention is where it's at. We need to do that. You have a chemical imbalance, but at the same time, you need to have these recovery activities involved in your life, or you're probably not going to recover. So far so good with the ASAM, but it gets a little tricky, as I'll point out to you, and where it thinks the 12-step process is in this disease. Recovery is an interesting concept to me. It implies not only improvement, but potentially remission. It demands a socialization and camaraderie. And I cannot stress that point enough, that you cannot be alone. You can't do it alone. The 12-step AA and NA model it works. It works for millions of people all over the country, and all over the world. The reason that it works, and I will talk a lot about this, is that it's counterintuitive to the disease of addiction. What do I mean by that? So when you walk into the rooms of AA and NA, you are walking into a room full of people that mirror who you are. These are 10, 15, 50 people that are either going through exactly what you're going through, or have already been to where you've been. And so the group process works. It's counterintuitive. The disease will tell you to stay alone. The disease will tell you that you're not worthy of being part of any kind of group. The disease will tell you that you can do it on your own. And so AA is a counterintuitive solution to disease. And in a way, if you look at it from a medical perspective, it arrests the process of your disease thinking. And so you go into a room full of people that are like-minded, and you start to realize that you're not alone. You start to build strength. And so when you're in that process, you may not feel that in the beginning, but as you go and as you develop peers and sponsors, and you go to different meetings and you have a home group, all of a sudden, you become an extension of what already has existed for many, many decades and many, many years. And I can't stress the concept of this counterintuitive process, because that is what medicine does. It arrests the process in your brain. And that's what meetings do. Meetings are medicine. So to me, it's always been a fascinating approach. The psychosocial activities complemented with the medicines that we use. It's the exact opposite of isolation and contempt for others. The term recovery describes a process as well as a destination. The underlying premise of recovery is that of hope. Hope that a person with potentially a fatal illness can avoid a catastrophic outcome. And let's face it, that when you're faced with a disease that has no cure, well, you might be on a path of self-destruction, and you might be on a path where you end up dying because you don't feel like there's a way out. And it is very similar in that way to diseases that we deal with and that we hear about that are in the mainstream every day, which is cancer and diabetes and other horrific diseases that people deal with. So hope is at the crux of all of this. Hope is one of those gray terms that I like to use. Gray term being that how I define hope might be different than one of you defines hope. Hope is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. That you create your own hope. You walk into the rooms of recovery and you have hope. You take medicine that's supposed to help you. You have hope. You have therapy and professionals, and you have hope. So a hope that a person does not expire because of a deadly illness like this. So recovery activities, they're not professional in nature, and nor should they ever be associated with a licensed clinician. And I want to make a distinction about that. Therapy and treatment, and regardless of what level of care that we're talking about, and we could be talking about outpatient traditional individual therapy, we could be talking about family therapy, we could be talking about inpatient and psychiatric therapy. It is not AA and NA. The two are actually very, very far apart. Recovery activity is such a personal, individual thing, and treatment is something entirely different. Treatment is with professionals. Recovery is with peers, friends, and mirror images of what you are. You can fail at treatment and still recover. I know that there's a myth out there that if you're successful, if you fail a treatment, well, then you're not gonna, you're gonna continue drinking, And actually, that's not true. In fact, I'll make a comment that there are many people that go to treatment that are not even alcoholics and drug addicts. They go to treatment, maybe they're on their way and they're becoming a budding drug addict or alcoholic, but not necessarily so. So the two are not synonymous with each other, but recovery activities are massively important. Group think is massively important. Following a program, having structure. And again, I want to go back to this concept of structure. I want to go back to this concept of group. So why are recovery activities so effective with addicts? Addicts are, some of them are antisocial, narcissistic. A few of them have borderline personality disorder. They've got mental health issues, bipolar, depressed, anxiety. Why is it so effective? Why do millions of people respond? And remember, I'm going to go back to this counterintuitive thinking. And the reason is that there are no rules. There's no rules, right? There's suggestions. And I know it's a cliche and you say, oh, it's a suggestion, this, but it's really a rule. No. An addict will reject rules. An addict in recovery or trying to be in recovery will not reject a suggestion. They may not follow it today, but they're not going to reject it. So it's not boxing them in, and it's counterintuitive, and that speaks to the disease of addiction. You're basically tricking the disease of addiction, if you will, by being counterintuitive and being part of something that's structured but really has no rules. For example, you should get a sponsor, right? It's highly suggested that you get a sponsor. It's highly suggested and recommended that you go to 90 meetings in 90 days, but you don't have to. There's nobody going to wake you up. There's nobody going to call you, right? You might have some friends that, that trouble you, but at the end of the day, you're your own person. It comes from within. And that's a very important point when we're talking about recovery activities. It has to come from within, because there are no rules. So one of the most familiar recovery activities engaged in by persons with addiction is participation in the activities of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay. And we all know that. We all know that there's home groups. We know that there's barbecues. We know that there's social events, and there's sobriety along all these lines. There's nonprofit, there's volunteering your time, there's giving back. And that's the other piece to this that's so important, is that a lot of times people that are addicts are bored. They're not stupid. They're not messed up. They're bored. And the definition of bored is you're thinking about yourself too much. And when you're thinking about yourself too much, guess what? You do selfish things. And so that's why drugs become your identity, alcohol becomes your identity, and all the other things that are associated with it. ASAM's definition of addiction document concludes that treatment of addiction saves lives. So here we are. ASAM is still supportive of the recovering community, and it points out that in some cases of addiction, medication management can improve treatment outcomes, and that in most cases of addiction, the integration of psychosocial rehabilitation and ongoing care with evidence-based medication provides the best results. Common sense, let me take my medicine, better life through chemistry, but also the psychosocial rehabilitation activities, physical activity, social activity, all of that, so that it's really a holistic approach. But psychosocial interventions, which have been around since psychologists were called alienists, are the foundation of treatment most persons receive when they seek assistance from the addiction treatment professional or agency. So let me stop there for a second. This is where ASAM goes left and recovery therapies go to the right. The ASAM, the criteria, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, I don't want to say they frown upon this stuff, but the psychosocial therapies are not as important And why is this so important? How does this affect us? It affects us in this way. You don't get the treatment that you deserve. Insurance companies don't pay for the treatment that you have in your benefits. The families are more confused over what is a disease and what is not, and how do they manage their lives. And so medication is expensive. Let's not forget that. And so this is where the divergence occurs. This is where they really miss the boat in this whole process. And this is where I say to you, a school, an educational tool like the academy, like the things that you guys are doing. I'm sure many of you are professionals, higher education, and doing very, very well for yourself, or have goals and aspirations to do very, very well for yourself. This is critical. 12-step therapeutic interventions, they work. Statistically, they work. Historically, they work. Think about this for a minute. Psychologists used to be called alienists. It's true. It's very true. Alienists, meaning something is foreign. It's alien to you or to us. And now they're psychologists, and many of them are loved and cherished and respected. It's come a long way. And during that whole time, people have recovered. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about that. This is where the path differs. Traditional addiction treatment in America is derived from a multidisciplinary treatment of chronic mental disease. And the peer support group of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was founded in 1935, thank you, Bill W., by two middle-aged, desperate for an answer, and looked inward to hang on to each other for hope. Their story, Dr. Bob and Bill W., described in the Big Book. And those of you, I just need to mention this, the Big Book is the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they're one and the same. The Big Book is not this huge book. Where's the Big Book? It's not a 10-by-8 book. It's just a book. But it's the Big Book because your story is in there. It was published in 1939. It's a path of recovery. It describes 12 steps in the process of recovery outlined by the authors. These guys were alcoholics, so they spoke of their own truth. One of the evidence-based practices of modern addiction outlined by Medicare, all insurance companies, and all quality treatment providers is 12-step facilitation therapy. So they say that, but then when it comes to the actual treatment, 12 steps is looked upon as a secondary intervention. It complements, if you will. It's the Robin to your Batman. And so it doesn't take the forefront. And I will argue that it is just as important as medication management and some very, very intense therapy. There are many kinds of counseling and psychotherapy that can be helpful for the person with addiction. Of course, my favorite is cognitive behavioral therapy because it makes sense and it's logical. Okay. Cognitive behavioral therapy, and we can do a whole webinar on this. Cognitive behavioral therapy is I have irrational thoughts and the outcome is not helpful to me. I suffer severe consequences. So the idea is challenge a person's irrational thoughts, which will change their feelings, which changes their behavior, which changes the outcome. And that's in essence, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is arguably the most widespread evidence-based, successful offering, if you will, to persons with addiction. This approach challenges irrational thoughts and thought chains and pathways and understands the thoughts and feelings that can lead to high-risk situations, denial, and relapse behaviors, and seeks to minimize relapse by specifying unhealthy cognitions and behaviors, otherwise known as stinking thinking. Now, along these lines, I want to point out three things that are relevant to cognitive behavioral therapy as it relates to the addict within the 12-step process. And there's really three aspects. The one is, what's their level of commitment, how optimistic they are, and how motivated they are for success. So commitment, motivation, and optimistic. Now, with all of these, I can have tremendous amount of optimism because I have magical thinking and I don't live in reality. I live in Disney World, and I want to hang out with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And so I have this magical thinking, but I'm extremely optimistic, even though I've been to treatment 100 times. I can't stay sober, and I've spent all my parents' money, and I've devastated everybody in my life. But I am going to get this. So optimism is not really a good indicator, although it's good if you are optimistic. Okay, good. The other one is motivation. Motivation is one of those gray words, again, just like hope. Motivation sort of goes on a scale from 1 to 10. It could be 1, it could be 10, depending on the topic, depending on the time of day. Some of you are morning people, some of you are night people. If you talk to you in the morning before your coffee, you're not motivated. Talk to you at night, before you go to sleep, maybe you're motivated, maybe you're not, but we got to catch you the right way. You got to catch fire, right? But commitment, that's the key, because commitment is behavior. What are you showing me? You're talking, your lips are moving, you're giving me lip service and good talk, which addicts do wonderfully, by the way, but you're not really showing me that you're committed or showing yourself that you're committed. So, example, the rooms of recovery talk about the 12 steps. There's 12 steps for a reason, and they're in order for a reason. Now, you don't have to follow them. There's not a rule that says you must follow these or else. You can do it your way, smorgasbord therapy and smorgasbord steps. And you can go to step 1 and you can go to step 5 and back to 4 and up to 6 and down to 12 and all this other stuff that people get involved with. But that doesn't show that you're committed, because you're not committed to doing things the right way and doing it correctly and having having the ability to follow through. Commitment is key. Okay. So 12-step facilitation therapy is still tried and true, proven approach. It is far more than advising a patient to go to AA and providing them a list of meetings, locations, and times. Anybody can do that. In 12-step therapy, the therapist actively probes and nudges, encourages not only the attendance, but the participation, the commitment, as I said, in meetings. It explains the potential benefits of working with a sponsor and promotes the individual developing a relationship with a sponsor. There's another word that's important, relationship. We know that during the disease process, you don't have relationships, you have customers. And what can that person do for me? So it's basically everybody is a pawn in your life, and how could I move the chessboard around, and how can they do for me my bidding? It explores problems of psychological resistance to attendance and to relationships, and it opens the door to AA related activities such as volunteer services, a home group, clubhouse, and involvement in sober events and activities. So again, participation. What's your level of commitment? In 12-step recovery, a confusing, complex idea or an intervention? I'm not sure it's either of those things. Many addiction specialists contend that while the majority of continuing medical education in addiction aimed at sharing novel breakthroughs and improving practice and outcomes, mostly addressing medications, it is the psychosocial therapies which warrant at least equal attention, if not more. Remember, I was talking about that earlier. Some addiction medicine physicians and specialists only spend a very limited number of hours dedicated to the actual fellowship and concepts surrounding AA. In other words, they don't know. They're tone deaf to an addict's needs. Absolutely tone deaf. Medication and change in chemistry are leading the charge in how a person recovers. According to some experts, however, it is more and more evident that psychosocial change is what is necessary for true remission and into recovery. Providing a drug to replace a drug feels hypocritical and a cop-out of sorts. Okay, I think that's a little strong. I wrote that just so you guys know. I do think it's a little strong, but because better life through chemistry, through medication, but the psychosocial activities is absolutely critical. If you replace a drug for a drug and don't do anything else, you probably won't recover. 12-step recovery addresses the psychology of the person with addiction, as well as the individual's spirituality, his or her values, his or her connectedness to others, which is critical, absolutely critical. I'll give you an example of that. I was just talking to somebody today about that. You literally could be in a stadium of 75,000 people and still feel very much alone. And that is the plight of the addict. His or her willingness to engage with others and humbly ask for help. The process of change of 12-step recovery starts with an acceptance that when friends or loved ones point out that things are amiss in one's life, they are likely correct, and things have likely become unmanageable. So this word acceptance, another gray word that has many, many definitions, is not just for the 12-step, but it has its tentacles in therapy and in life in general. Think about the things that all of you have been willing to accept or not. Think about the things that have just been an ultimate struggle. When an addict starts to accept things how they are and starts to think about how their behavior impacts others, they're on their way. And while taking personal responsibility and accepting accountability for one's actions are considered key steps, 12-step recovery outlines that excessive self-reliance and the firm stance of, I can get myself out of this, or I know what to do about this. We've all heard that, or I got this, or all I need to do is make money, will be roadblocks to recovery from addiction. Getting out of oneself and recognizing that one doesn't have all the answers and humbly asking for help, that's even more powerful than I love you, to another human being is absolutely critical. The term self-help, I just want to say this, is often used to describe AA and NA, doesn't really get the point. AA and NA, yes, it's self-help. Yes, it's in the bookstores and online and all of that, but it's misleading. It's not professional help, but it is groupthink, and there is a spirituality component to it, because I've seen it and we've seen it, and the research backs it up, that a group of people can impact your life in a very, very positive way. The 12-step approaches accept that addiction is a disease and it isn't simply a sign of moral weakness. There is a focus on values and morals in 12-step recovery, as the individual is encouraged to engage in the process of taking a moral inventory of one's life and past actions in preparation for making amends to others as indicated and possible and appropriate. 12 steps in AA is an ironic program. I said to you all, it's counterintuitive. It has no rules, no right way or super adherence to any real ideal except sobriety. If you're sober, you can be part of it and you can do anything you want. And yet it attracts millions of addicts who have spent a lifetime going against rules the right way with anyone else's ideals. It is an enigma, an entity that's the opposite of what you think it is, and yet mostly because it touches almost every aspect of the human condition and no judgment at its core. So remember the following. If you're guilty about something, go see your rabbi or your priest. If you have shame, go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting, because that's a mirror. That is a mirror of who you are. And to walk around with shame, the disease of shame, is only going to cause you more issues, more problems, and the disease of addiction will win every time. ASAM believes that step facilitation therapy and 12-step recovery overall are at risk of becoming dying arts, like some sort of arts and crafts. There may come a day soon, and I think it's sooner than later, ASAM, because of the type of physicians influencing it, may no longer require 12-step recovery of any kind as part of its requirements. So let me just paint a picture. We've got a ton of physicians, really smart people who know what the heck they're doing for the most part. But when it comes to addiction and substance abuse, they're going, the 12 steps right now is not really where it's at. We can do without it. And that's happening more and more. That the focus is too much on short-term therapy with a big dose of medication management. We need young, educated professionals within behavioral health to understand the importance of the 12-step and continue to look past whether you believe it is a disease or a highly personal decision, or run from it and lean on the therapies mostly taught at higher education. The facts are that acceptance, honesty, which is a behavior, willingness are all part of the 12 steps and can be spoken about in therapy all the time. Those concepts, acceptance, honesty, willingness, all those gray words are never going away. And it is the foundation of somebody recovering. It is the foundation of therapy, and they can live synonymously with each other. I know that we'll have time for questions. I believe that there's some questions that people have written in, and I'm happy to address that now. So hang on one second. So the question here is, how do you handle someone who is not ready to recover but clearly needs help? That's a great question. So a lot of times in the recovery process, you have to let a person feel their consequences. A lot of times, people that are not ready to recover are not ready to recover because the system around them has not really allowed them to feel real consequences, to really suffer through it. For example, the reason that addicts and enablers are so connected to each other is because an enabler will always help an addict, and an addict will love an enabler to take care of all their consequences. So a lot of times, the person or the people around them need to take a step back, and they need to stop trying to figure out the solution for the individual. Great question. How do I use my experience with addiction to help people? So I'm so happy that this question was asked, because this is a key element to really helping people, and the key element is called empathy. Too many people get into the field of addiction and behavioral health and mental health for the wrong reasons. They want to fix themselves or fix others, whatever it is. Empathy is critical. I'm not sure that empathy can be taught, maybe. But if you have empathy and compassion for somebody, if you're able to visualize walking in their shoes, or you've experienced maybe some of what they've experienced, and you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be in recovery. But if you are, and it's your addiction, and you went through that, you're in recovery yourself, use that empathy. Think about your worst day, and think about what you did and how you got through it, and being able to reflect that to somebody and listen to them, actively listen to them about their situation with no judgment. You'll be a tremendous, what I call a change agent, tremendous change agent. What's the next question?
Do you think the medical corps is trained enough in addiction?
Do I believe, the question is, do I believe the medical corps is trained enough in addiction? That's the question, right? The answer to that is no way. I would say that emergency rooms, medical corps, police officers are not trained enough. There's some problems there in that they don't know how to ask for help, and also their training background. There's no training on addiction. It's probably a 3-hour course that they take, and that's it. So woefully underserved. Any other questions?
Is there a better alternative to the war on drugs?
The question is there a better alternative to the war on drugs? Yes. So I think that the government has completely missed the boat. I think that it's really to me, it's a two-pronged attack. One is that we need to bolster up our education at a very young age. I think that the drugs and the consequences of drugs need to be taught in elementary school, and not just on, oh, by the way, I'm going to bring somebody in and we're going to have we're going to have a seminar on it. It really needs to be part of a curriculum starting from day one, and there needs to be more events with the idea of educating the society, and in a massive way. I think that it needs to be more part of the mainstream. I think people need to understand it more. They're also, so a lot of money should go into education. I think the government misses the boat on that. The other way to do it, and this has been successful in countries in Europe. Portugal is one of those countries where I am not an advocate. If somebody is on drugs and they kill somebody, and they need to go to prison. I want to be clear about that. I'm pretty moderate about this stuff, but I do think that drug offenders need a shot at treatment, and I think more money needs to go into treatment, and instead of going into jail. And I'll give you guys an example. So there's schizophrenics right now that are walking around in our jail system that stole from the 7-Eleven because they thought that the tree told them to do it. That's just a kind of a silly example, but nonetheless, there's no reason for an individual like that to be walking around in the prison system and basically just learning how to become a better prisoner. So I think that we need more substance abuse programs within the court system. I think that we need more mental health. I think that the government needs to pour a ton of money into education, starting from the grassroots.
How do you deal with co-occurring disorders?
The question is, how do I deal with co-occurring disorders? So this is a great debate, a wonderful topic of discussion. So I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways. So first of all, the question is, did the disease of addiction come first and then the mental health issue, or was the mental health issue always there and then somebody got addicted? And the answer is, I don't care. That's the answer. The answer is, who cares? Don't worry about it. And here's the bottom line. Everything is under the umbrella of behavioral health. Everything from, and it doesn't matter what it is, mental illness and addiction, it's all intertwined with each other. I could argue that addiction is a mental illness. It's basically an anxiety disorder, which its foundation is of fear and loneliness and a very, very poor belief system, probably coming from the family unit. And then mental illness, of course, can be chemically induced, chemically embraced, It also could be family oriented. But the way to treat dual diagnosis is you have to divide and conquer, because not all dual diagnosed people are the same. So the way to do it is there's if I had a visual, I'd be able to do this. But if you can imagine a quadrant, a square with a cross in it, so you've got four areas in it, and one area you want what's called, you want to look at a person who's got a really bad drug addiction, but they got like low grade depression, right? That's one kind of dually diagnosed person. And what you do is you start to do a profile. All right. So you start to say, really bad drug addict, all the wonderful things that comes with that, low grade mental illness. What kind of person are we talking about? Generally speaking, age, socioeconomic status, all of that. So you have that. The next quadrant is, you can say that the person has really low chemical dependency, chemical abuse, but really high mental illness, right? So sort of the opposite. They're also dually diagnosed. They're probably schizophrenic who smokes pot. Why does he smoke pot? Because he's trying to make the voices go away. I will say this as a little commentary. I would love to inject people with schizophrenia and have them talk about empathy and talk about and walk around for one day with voices in their head and see how they feel. And the mental health population may get the attention that it deserves. It is painful. It is not anything anybody wants to be part of. And it is the main reason why schizophrenics who are hearing voices will do drugs, because they're self-medicating. It's actually self-preservation. So that's the second type of dual diagnosis. The third type of dual diagnosis is really bad drug addiction and really bad mental illness. Like you're high end, right? You're a schizophrenic. Let's not pick on the schizophrenics. You're a bipolar with psychotic features, and you're just a junkie. You're just an under the bridge, really bad junkie. That's another dually diagnosed patient, client, however you want to put them. And what's the profile for them? Where do they come from? What population? What's their age? All of the things that I've just described. And then the fourth one is low drug addiction and low mental illness, low grade, maybe low grade depression. Maybe somebody is just dabbling in marijuana. It could be a teenager, that type of thing. And same thing. And if you, and again, I apologize for not having a visual for you guys. I know it's a lot easier, but if you look at it from those four areas, you are able to divide and conquer, and you know what you're dealing with. In another webinar, I can get into that quadrant, and I can talk about thought disorders and personality disorders and the different types of drug addictions that there are. Another question?
Last question.
Sure.
Is schizophrenia hereditary?
The question is schizophrenia hereditary? And my quick answer is yes. That it is hereditary. That if schizophrenia is in your gene pool, you are more likely to have schizophrenia than not. That's not to say that it can't skip a generation or generations. That's not to say that you absolutely get it. But it is a disease of the mind. It's a horrific disease, and it's usually set on between the ages of 18 and 25 when somebody has their first psychotic break. But yes, it is hereditary, and it can be passed on, unfortunately. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you all. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar. My plan is to continue doing these types of webinars. I would love for more questions to come in about webinar topics, and I will absolutely address each one of them. I appreciate your time, and have a good evening.